By the third week, the little girl had stopped crying. Not because the pain stopped, but because every time she cried, the dogs would whimper, and when the dogs whimpered, her stepmother would come to the door of the kennel and pour a bucket of cold water through the slats. It was October in Kumasi. The cold water took 8 minutes to stop being cold in her body. She counted the minutes. She was 9 years old, and she had already learned that silence was the only thing in her life she had any control over. What the stepmother did not know, what she never thought to check, was the notebook Adaeze kept hidden inside the collar of the largest dog, a brown and white mongrel named Efo, who slept against her back on the coldest nights. In that notebook, in handwriting so small it required a person to hold the page close to their face, was everything. 10 years later, when a woman in a white-collared linen suit walked through the glass doors of Mensa Boateng and Associates Chartered Accountants at 8:41 a.m. On a Thursday, that notebook was still in her bag. Her name was Adaeze Akabe. She was 19 years old, and the stepmother who had put her in that kennel did not yet know she was coming. Adaeze's mother, Comfort Achebe, died at Komfo Anokie Teaching Hospital in Kumasi at 6:22 in the morning on the 14th of March, when Adaeze was 8 years and 4 months old. The death was from malaria compounded by hypertension her mother had managed without medication for 11 years, because the medication cost 37 naira per week that she did not have. Adaeze was not in the room when it happened. She was outside in the corridor sitting on a plastic chair, holding a tin of biscuits her mother had packed for her the night before in case she got hungry. She ate one biscuit. Then she held the tin in her lap and waited for someone to come out of the room and tell her what she already knew. Her father, Gerald Akabe, was a handsome man who wore pressed shirts and smelled of imported cologne on Sundays. He worked in the offices of a timber exporter on Industrial Area Road, and he had, at one time, been someone Adaeze believed would always come when she needed him. He came to the funeral in a dark suit. He held her hand during the burial and told her that she was the bravest girl he had ever known. He used the word brave 5 times in 4 days. Adaeze would later understand that when adults called a child brave, what they were really doing was asking the child to do something they themselves were afraid to do. By June of that year, Gerald had married a woman named Pauline Nwosu. Pauline was 41 years old, broad-shouldered, with a way of looking at Adaeze that reminded the girl of the way the pharmacist at Makola Market used to look at her mother's coin pile before deciding not to count it. Pauline had 2 sons of her own from a previous marriage, Tobena, who was 13, and Obena, who was 11, and from the first Thursday she moved into the house on Asante Newtown Road. She organized the household in a way that clarified exactly who belonged to it and who did not. Adaeze was given the back room behind the kitchen, a room the size of a storage cupboard that had a window facing the yard where the dogs were kept. There were 4 dogs, Ifo, who was the oldest, 2 others named Kojo and Pepper, and a small one nobody had bothered to name that Adaeze started calling Sunday because he was the only creature in the house who seemed genuinely glad to see her on that particular day of the week. By the end of August, the back room was gone. Adaeze was given a folded mat, a thin blanket, and the kennel. The first night she slept there, she pressed her face against the side of Ifo's neck and did not move until morning. She was 8 years and 7 months old. What Pauline Nwosu had correctly identified in Adaeze was that the child was quiet. What Pauline had not identified, what she lacked the particular kind of attention required to see, was what was behind the quiet. Adaeze had learned to read from her mother at age 4, using old copies of a newspaper her mother brought home from the household, where she cleaned 3 days a week. By the time she started school at age 6, she was reading at the level of a 10-year-old. By 8, She was solving problems in her workbook that the teacher had not yet introduced to the class. Her primary school teacher, a woman named Miss Ama Owusu Boateng, had written to Gerald Akebe twice in the year before Comfort died, requesting a meeting to discuss what she called, in her careful, formal handwriting, your daughter's remarkable facility with numerical reasoning. Gerald had attended one of the two meetings. He had sat in the plastic chair across from Miss Owusu Boateng and nodded at appropriate intervals and said that, yes, Adeze was a bright girl. Then he had gone back to his office and his pressed shirts and his cologne. And 3 months later his wife was dead, and 9 months after that his new wife had placed his daughter in a kennel. In the kennel, Adeze continued doing what she had always done. She worked. She had persuaded a neighborhood boy named Kwadwo, who was 12 and fond of Ifo, and who sometimes brought table scraps to the kennel gate, to bring her the discarded exercise books from his elder sister's school bags. The sister was in JSS 2 and threw out workbooks she no longer needed at the end of each term. Kwadwo brought them flat against his chest under his shirt so that Pauline would not see them from the kitchen window. He brought pencils too, and a small torchlight, he said, had belonged to his late uncle. Adeze worked through the mathematics workbooks in order. When she finished them, she began working through them again, this time constructing her own problems at the back of each book. By the time she was 11 years old, she could work through compound interest calculations, basic bookkeeping double entries, and foreign exchange problems she had constructed herself from the newspaper pages Kwadwo occasionally smuggled through the gate. She kept a small notebook, hidden, as she would keep many things in her life. Inside, Efo's collar. In this notebook, she wrote 3 things each night in handwriting so precise it looked like print. One thing she had noticed about how money worked, one question she could not yet answer, and one sentence she wanted to remember. On the night of October 4th, when she was 9 years old and the cold water had taken 11 minutes to stop being cold instead of 8, she wrote, "Money does not disappear. It only moves. The person who understands where it moved can always find it." She did not know that night that this sentence would, 9 years later, save an institution employing 147 people. If this story is already sitting in your chest the way I think it is, subscribe now, because what happens in the next few minutes changes everything that came before it. The years in that house had a particular quality. They were long in the days and short in the memory, which is the nature of endurance. Gerald Akebe was present at meals and absent everywhere else. He did not ask Adeze why she no longer slept in the back room. He did not ask where she kept her clothes. He looked at his daughter across the dinner table on the 7 occasions per year she was invited to eat at that table, and he used the word brave. Adeze began to understand that her father was not a cruel man. He was something the girl found harder to forgive. He was a man who had decided that not seeing was the same as not knowing. Tobena and Obina moved through the house like men who had been told they owned it. They broke things and let Adeze be blamed for the breaking. They ate the larger portions and said nothing when Adeze's plate was set with the smaller. They were not extraordinary in their cruelty. They were ordinary in their indifference, which was a different thing entirely. Pauline and Wosu ran the house on Asante Newtown Road with the efficiency of someone who understood that control, exercised quietly and consistently over a long enough period, did not need to announce itself. Adeze gave her nothing to find. She kept herself clean with the hose bib behind the kennel. She washed her 2 school uniforms at 4:47 a.m. before anyone else in the house was awake, and hung them on the fence behind the dogs. She ate what she was given and said thank you. She went to school and came directly back. She gave no one the satisfaction of watching her perform any emotion that could be used against her. And every night, by the light of Kwadwo's uncle's torch, she worked. By 13, she had moved through the mathematics entirely and was writing out constructed problems in financial accounting, assets, liabilities, ledger balancing, working from a torn-page copy of an old Institute of Chartered Accountants study guide that a church charity had been using as a doorstop, and that Miss Owusu Boateng, who had not forgotten her, had wrapped in newspaper and left at the school gate with Kwadwo's name written on the outside. Miss Owusu Boateng had also left a note inside. It said, in the same careful handwriting, "Your mind is not a kennel. Nobody can lock it." Adeze folded the note into the spine of the notebook and kept it there until the notebook was full. Then, she folded it into the spine of the next one. What happened in the third year of secondary school shifted things. The school, Kumasi Girls' senior high school, held a mathematics competition in October. The entry form required a fee of 15 cedis. Adeze did not have 15 cedis. She did not ask Pauline. She did not ask Gerald. She sat outside the competition room on the morning of the event and worked through the problems on the practice sheet that had been given to registered participants, using the back of an old receipt Kwadwo had given her, because he had nothing else. The mathematics teacher, Mr. Kolade Okafor, found her there. He sat down on the step beside her, which surprised her, because teachers at that school did not generally sit on steps. He looked at what she had written. He looked for a long time. Then, he stood up, went back inside, and came out again with the coordinator. Adeze sat her paper in the room with the registered students. She finished it 31 minutes before the time was called. She placed her pen down on the desk and folded her hands and waited. She won. First place, district-wide. The prize was a book and a certificate and a handshake from the headmistress. It was also, though none of them yet knew this, the moment that set a particular chain of events in motion. Mr. Kolade Okafor submitted Adeze's name to the Ghana Scholarship Secretariat the following Monday morning. He wrote, in the letter of nomination, that in 22 years of teaching secondary mathematics, he had encountered 3 students he considered genuinely exceptional. He was nominating the third. He did not tell Adeze he had done this. He did not tell anyone at the school he had done this. He did not tell Gerald Akebe. He submitted the letter, placed a copy in a folder in his filing cabinet, and returned to teaching. 4 months later, a letter arrived at the school addressed to Adeze Akebe. Mr. Okafor brought it to her personally. She opened it in the corridor outside her classroom. She read it 3 times. Then she put it in her bag, walked out to the courtyard, sat down on a bench under a neem tree, and did not move for 6 minutes. The letter offered her a full government scholarship to study accounting and finance at the University of Ghana, Legon, beginning the following September. Accommodation, fees, books, and a monthly stipend of 420 cedis. The letter was signed by Chief Mensa Owusu, Director, Ghana Scholarship Secretariat. She had been sleeping in a kennel for 9 years. In September, she left. The University of Ghana at Legon sits on a campus where the roads are named for people who changed things. Adeze arrived with 1 bag, a single change of clothes, her notebooks, 3 of them, filled from corner to corner in her precise small handwriting, and the 420 cedis stipend she received at the end of the first month. She kept a running ledger of every cedi that came in and every cedi that went out, in a small book she had bought for 6 cedis at a stationery stall near the Accra Central Bus Terminal. She studied the way she had always worked, with a kind of focused, unhurried thoroughness that came from 10 years of practicing concentration in the dark. By the end of her second year, her lecturers were bringing her problems they could not solve cleanly, auditing irregularities in practice case files, multi-currency scenarios from client work they brought for teaching purposes. By the end of her third year, Professor Emmanuel Adeyemi Bright head of the Department of Accounting, had written her a letter of introduction to Mensa Boateng and Associates, one of the top 3 chartered accountancy firms in Accra. She graduated with first-class honors in July. On a Thursday in September, 8:41 in the morning, she walked through the glass doors of Mensa Boateng and Associates on Cantonments Road in Accra. She was wearing a white-collared linen suit she had bought the previous week for 180 cedis at a boutique on Osu, Oxford Street. She had pressed it herself the night before. It was clean. She carried a bag over her shoulder. A dark green leather bag, not expensive but good, given to her at graduation by a woman she had met in her first year at Legon, who had recognized something in the way Adaise held herself that reminded the older woman of her own mother. In that bag were her notebooks, all 3 of them, and a letter from Chief Mensa Owusu that she had kept for 2 years in the spine of the last one. At the reception desk, a young man named Felix looked up from his monitor and asked if she had an appointment. She said she did. She gave her name. Felix typed. He read something on his screen. He stood up straighter than he had been standing a moment before. "Please have a seat," he said. "Mr. Boateng will see you now." What Adaise did not know when she sat down in that lobby, what she had not been told, and what she would only understand later, was that the folder on Mr. Boateng's desk that morning contained not only her application and Professor Adeyemi Bright's letter, but also a second letter. This second letter had arrived 3 months before Adaise had submitted any application at all. It had been written by Miss Ama Owusu Boateng, retired now, teaching privately from her home in Tema. The same handwriting, the same care. Addressed to her cousin, the senior partner of Mensa Boateng and Associates. It said, "I taught many children in 30 years. One of them slept in a kennel for 9 of those years and still placed first in the district. Her name is Adaise Akebe. If she comes to you, do not make her wait." She had written it because Kwadwo, who was now 21 and working at a mobile money kiosk near the Accra motorway, had called her in June to say that Adaise had graduated. He had read it in a newspaper. There had been a photograph, small in the back pages, of the first-class students at Legon. He recognized her face. Miss Owusu Boateng had sat down and written the letter the same afternoon. The lobby at Mensa Boateng and Associates had a clock on the wall above the reception desk. It was 8:53 a.m. when a door opened, and a tall man in a gray suit came out and crossed the room with his hand extended. "Miss Akebe," he said. "Sir," she said, and stood. She followed him through the door. The office of Kwadwo Mensa Boateng, founding partner, had windows that faced the Cantonments district and let in, at that hour of the morning, a particular angle of light that made the room feel serious without being cold. He indicated a chair. She sat. He sat across from her and opened the folder. He asked her 3 questions. The first was a technical question about deferred taxation. She answered it in 2 sentences. The second was a case-based question involving a multi-entity consolidation with a currency translation problem embedded in it. She worked through it on the notepad he placed in front of her, slowly, not rushing, arriving at the answer and then checking it from a second direction before she looked up. The third question was not a technical question at all. He asked her to tell him what she had learned that nobody had taught her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That money does not disappear, it only moves, and the person who understands where it moved can always find it." Kwadwo Mensa Boateng set down his pen. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Monday. 8 o'clock. 2 words." That was all. She stood up, thanked him, and walked out through the lobby, past Felix at the reception desk, through the glass doors, and out onto Cantonments Road. The October heat hit her as she stepped through the door. She stood on the pavement for a moment, her bag over her shoulder, the morning traffic moving past on the road, and she breathed. Ifo had died the year before she left for Ligon. She had not been allowed to go back for it. She breathed again. Then, she walked toward the bus stop. 3 weeks after she started at Mensa Boateng and Associates, Adeyezi was assigned to a team reviewing the books of a mid-sized timber export company based in Kumasi. The company had been flagged for a discrepancy in a 5-year tax filing, a complex, layered error that had compounded across several fiscal years and now represented a potential liability of 2.3 million cedis. The senior associate who had been working the case had spent 11 days on it without resolution. Adese worked on it for 4 days. On the 5th day, she placed a 23-page report on the senior partner's desk. The report identified the original error, traced its compounding across 4 separate tax years, and proposed a remediation pathway that would reduce the liability to 740,000 cedis. It included a cross-referenced ledger reconciliation that another partner, a man who had been in the industry for 28 years, described later to a colleague as the clearest piece of audit work he had seen from a first-year associate in his entire career. The timber company was based on Industrial Area Road in Kumasi. Its name was Ashebe Timber Export Limited. Her father's name was on the company registration. She had known this when she accepted the assignment. She completed the work anyway. She did not make a single error. She saved the company 156 million cedis, and she presented the findings to the client meeting without any sign in her face or her voice or her body that the name on the door had meant anything to her at all. Afterwards, in the file room, she stood alone for 3 minutes. Then she went back to her desk. Gerald Akebe was not at the client meeting. His business partner attended in his place, but the report was sent to the company's registered address, and Gerald's name was on the letter. He would read it eventually. He would recognize the handwriting. He would recognize the name. And he would have to decide, in the privacy of his own chest, what kind of man he had been. Adese was not there for that part. She was already on to the next case. 6 months after she started, Mr. Mensa Boateng called her into his office again. He told her that the firm was expanding its training division and that he wanted her to develop and lead a program for junior associates in advanced audit methodology. The program would serve 12 trainees in the first intake. The first session would be held on a Monday morning, at a time she would select. At a location she would select. She selected 8 a.m. She selected the conference room on the 3rd floor, with the windows that faced Cantonments Road, where she had first walked through the glass doors 11 months before. She stood at the front of the room on that first Monday morning and looked at the 12 young people in the chairs before her, and she thought about what Miss Owusu Boateng had written on a piece of paper and left inside a broken notebook inside a study guide that had been used to prope. Door open. Your mind is not a kennel. Nobody can lock it. She opened the session with a question. She asked each of them to write down one thing they had learned that nobody had formally taught them. She told them to be honest. She told them it didn't matter if what they wrote seemed too small or too personal or too strange. She did not tell them why she was asking this particular question. She collected the pages. She would read them later, alone, at her desk. She had 14 files on her desk that week. She worked through them with the same focused, unhurried thoroughness that she had practiced every night for 10 years. In the dark, by the light of a dead man's torch, with her back against a dog who kept her warm when the cold water took too long to leave her bones. What Pauline Nwosu had thought she was doing, the night she placed a mat and a blanket at the kennel gate and told an 8-year-old girl that this was where she would sleep, was removing a problem from her household. This is what people believe they are doing when they reduce a person to their circumstances. They believe they are deciding the person's outcome. They believe that where a person sleeps determines what a person becomes. What Pauline had actually done was hand Adaize the only thing no one could take from her: the silence, the dark, the time. And in that time, a mind that nobody had thought to lock, because nobody had understood that a mind cannot be locked the way a door can be locked, or a gate, or a kennel. You can put a child in a kennel. You can take away the bed, the room, the table, the plate. You can make her wash her uniforms at 4:47 in the morning before anyone is awake. You can pour cold water through slats in October and call it discipline. But you cannot take what she carries in her hands. You cannot take the numbers behind her eyes, or the sentences she has memorized, or the questions she writes in the dark in handwriting so small it looks like printing. Some people don't build their lives out of comfort. They build them out of memory, out of cold, out of everything they were forced to survive. And when they stand at the front of a room one morning with 12 young people looking at them, they are standing on a foundation that no one can remove, because no one can reach it. That foundation is not in any building. It is not on any road in cantonments or any floor of any firm. It is inside a brown and white dog named Ifo, who died before she could go back to say goodbye, and a teacher who left a message at a gate, and a boy who carried notebooks under his shirt because a girl needed something to write in, and a night in October when the cold took 11 minutes, and a sentence she wrote down and kept. Foundations don't disappear. They rise, they rebuild, and one day they stand at the front of a room and ask 12 people a question only someone who survived something could think to ask. If you have ever been placed somewhere that was never supposed to hold you, in a job, a house, a category, a corner, leave your answer in the comments. I want to read it. If this is the kind of story you needed today, subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooked until they changed everything. I'll see you in the next one.